Hello sewing chums, it's Diane from Spencer Ogg Sewing Patterns here to introduce you to my new sewing pattern, Perfectly Popping Pouches. There are recessed zip pouches and baskets in a variety of sizes and base options. Oh my goodness, where do I start with this one? There are so many options. What's different about this pattern? Well, it shows you how to take just one set of pattern pieces and use them to achieve 5 very different looks. From a flat zip pouch, to a slim bottom zip pouch, to a wide bottom zip pouch, to a reversible storage basket, and then a basket with handles. And yes, they are all made from the same set of pattern pieces. It's a moderately easy sewing pattern. Pattern is instant download and comes with step-by-step written instructions, detailed colour photographs, pattern measurements, a supply list, and there's also a video to take you step-by-step through making the different variations. As with all my patterns, it's designed to be made on a domestic sewing machine. So we all know how to make a pouch. It's one of the first things we all try. So I thought, let's ramp up the action with a super pouch construction course to give you the knowledge and the tools to use in your own projects going forward. In this tutorial, we take just one set of pattern pieces and illustrate how to use them in 5 different ways. We've all made plenty of basic pouches, so this pattern starts with a flat zip pouch already brimming with extras. With a super easy recess zip method, the pouch has no visible seams on top and bottom, inside or out, and will turn it through a beautifully profile stitched inside pocket. I've added a popper to mine, but you don't need to. It has side tabs and a lining that is fixed to the bottom of the bag, so the lining has no bagginess and it doesn't lift or pull out. All these techniques can be used on your own projects going forward. Then we'll move on to a slim bottom zip pouch. So along with the previous features, we add a miracle flat bottom. So the pouch stands on its own just by adding folds to the outer and lining, so it's always square. And that means without having to box any corners and no struggling with your angles. The pouch falls flat for easy storage and then pops up to stand on a flat base. Next we move on to a wide bottom zip pouch, where I'll show you how to turn the pouch into a zipped flat bottom basket by increasing the size of the flat bottom, and we'll take a look at how we use zips, zip tabs and tails to give this accessible wide mouth opening. Next we take the zip away completely to make reversible storage baskets, still with a pocket and lovely contrast facings. And finally, a basket with handles. I'll show you how to add handles to the basket during construction to make a super cute open top reversible carry basket. And just to note, there's no binding and no hand stitching on any of these options. So yes, really, from just one set of pattern pieces in one size, we can make all these 5 options. And then at the end, I'll give you full sizing details for an additional 2 sizes. So you'll have 3 sizes in total: small, medium and large. And all of these can be made in the 5 different styles, giving a total of 15 options. The uses are endless. For stationery, school supplies, back to uni, for the office, use them for makeup and toiletries, medicines, nappies, sanitary towels, gift baskets, sewing supplies, tech, USB, leads, sewing, crochet, a picnic, cutlery, biscuits. The list is endless anyway. You could even use them as a bag organiser. They fold flat for easy storage, so you can make oodles of them for different uses and store them away. At the end of the tutorial, I'll explain how to increase and decrease the pouch size and the size of the flat bottom as you wish, and explain the impact of each action so you can then make them in any size and with any base dimensions you want to. Each pouch is made from just 5 rectangles that you can easily cut with a quilt rule. No paper pattern pieces, just easy inch or centimetre measurements, so there is no need for a printer or sizing paper pattern pieces. The size of the medium flat pouch is 10 by 7 inches or 26 by 18 centimetres, but obviously you've got a huge range to play with here and all the sizes are included in the instructions. You can size them up and down for your own needs and decorate them to your heart's content. Make a full set in one size or try a range of different options and sizes in the same fabric to make a lovely matching set. Have a look at some of these super creations from my amazing tester gang. Thank you testers for your time and effort, it's always very much appreciated. The pattern is suitable for any lighter weight fabrics including quilt cotton, Ankara, Essex linen, lightweight waterproof canvas, lightweight denim and canvas, wax canvas, oilskin. I actually came up with this pattern because of the free tutorial I made last year on fold flat reversible baskets. So many of you asked me how to add a zip to them, how to change the size and how to make them with the turn through method. Well, I just couldn't stop. Once I'd satisfied one option, I thought, well, I might as well add handles, a pocket, different shapes, different sizes, and the list went on. The perfectly popping pouch pattern is available now as an instant download PDF on my website or on Etsy by clicking the link below this video. Pop over to spencerogg.com for lots more of my patterns and tutorials, and why not sign up to my newsletter to be first in the know with anything new. Please do join our welcoming and helpful Facebook group to show off your makes. I always love seeing your Spencer Ogg creations. Ask questions and find bag making advice there too. Here on YouTube you'll find lots of free patterns and tutorials to keep you inspired. I can also be found on Instagram and TikTok. All the links can be found below this video. So if you like the idea of the perfectly popping pouches, let's go sew! Thank you for purchasing this Spencer Ogg pattern. I really hope you're going to enjoy making it along with me today. You'll find timestamps in the text below the video, just scroll down, and also links to many of the items I use. So let's make a start with things you're going to need for this pattern. So suitable outer fabrics. Any lighter weight fabrics including quilt cottons, Ankara, Essex linen, lightweight waterproof canvases, printed and plain, they're great for this actually. Oilskin, waxed canvas, they also work really well. Don't use wool tweeds, cork or vinyl, they're just too bulky for this project. The fabric requirements for each size are given in the written document. And for additional help with choosing fabrics for all your projects, I have a well illustrated video which I'll link below in the text and also above here. Hopefully I'll remember to put the link in. For your lining, you can use quilt cotton or a very lightweight waterproof canvas. Both of those work perfectly well. For your interfacing, for the outer and for the lining, just use a medium weight fusible interfacing. So this is an example Vilene F220 or a G700 or a Pellon SF101. But those are really just for when you're using the quilt cotton or cottons. If you're using waterproof canvas, oilskin, wax canvas, you won't need any interfacing on those at all. You'll need a zip if you're making the pouch, not if you're making the baskets. This is a number 5 nylon coil zip to match my outer. I'm using a 14-inch or longer for the medium size, but check the written document for the correct zip length for each size. You'll need one plastic snap to put on the pocket. It is optional, you don't need to put it on if you don't want to. I just find it gives it a nice little finish. I use polyester thread for strength, and you can add a logo badge inside or outside, or a handmade badge, anything you'd like to add. So not many ingredients to this one. So let's go ahead and cut out. In this video tutorial, I'll be making the medium size. As a reminder, all styles A to E are cut from the same medium pattern pieces. The size medium pattern pieces create all 5 styles of pouch and a basket. The additional sizes are at the end, the small and the large. They also create 5 styles each. So do try the medium pouch first as per the main instructions. So I've cut all my pieces out for the size medium. So I've just cut according to the medium cutting chart. So that's the first one in your pattern. And that medium cutting chart is the same regardless of whether you're making any of the 5 styles in a size medium. So size medium cutting chart is for styles A, B, C, D and E. So that's the flat pouch, the wide or narrow bottom zip pouch, and the baskets with or without handles. So it's the same cutting measurements, whichever. And if you want to cut the size small or large, you'll find those separately at the end of the pattern. And each of those small and large cutting directions will each make the 5 different styles too. So today we're going to concentrate on the size medium zip pouch. And if you want to make up the baskets, it's exactly the same directions and instructions, we just leave the zip out. And we do concentrate on that in a section at the end of the pattern as well. And I will run through it at the end of this tutorial. So just a few things to note for this pattern. As I say, it's all measurements. There's no actual paper pattern pieces. It's just easy to cut rectangles. There's just 5 rectangles plus a couple of extras if you want side tabs or handles or anything else. But it's just 5 pieces in general, and it's a nice easy pattern to cut. Cut as accurately as you can. It does make a difference. We discussed fabrics earlier, but stick with lighter weight fabrics. I'm using waterproof canvas here today for both the outside and the inside, so I don't need any interfacing. But lighter fabrics are best for this project. Don't move into heavy fabrics. And don't add fleece or foam to it, because it's just going to become too bulky, because we fold it up at the bottom to make the box bottom, the stand at the bottom. Use a non-directional print. Again, we don't want visible seams at the top and the bottom of this bag because we want it to have a nice smooth fold flat shape. If you need help with choosing fabrics for projects and any bag making in general, do have a look at my video on fabrics for bag making, and I'll add a link in below. The seam allowance is 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch throughout the pattern unless otherwise stated, and it is included in the pattern pieces. So if you're ready, let's make a start. So cut all your pieces according to your cutting chart, but don't fuse yet if you're adding interfacing. I'm cutting my pocket pieces in the outer fabric. You can use a bright contrast print if you like. It just adds a little bit of pop when you open the pouch. And a quick note on interfacings. I'm not using interfacings today because I don't need it. I'm using waterproof canvas and it's firm enough on its own. But there is a small section on interfacing at the beginning of the pattern, and it's quite important because if you're using quilt cottons and canvas and things like that where you do want to add a little bit of interfacing, we need to cut it out of the sides on the outer lining and the top and bottom on the pocket pieces. I'll put the diagram up so you can have a look at it now. But the reason for that is that we want to keep everything neat and slim. So we want to keep it out of the side seams because we've got all these folds at the bottom to produce the flat bottom base. And we want to keep it out of the top and bottom of the pocket inside, just to keep it nice and slim and trim. So it's not to do with how powerful your machine is at all. It's literally to keep it nice and slim looking. So if you're ready, let's go sew. So I'm going to add the optional side tabs. They are completely optional, as I say. I tend to add them in the pouches because it's something to grab onto when you're opening and closing the zip, but you don't really need them in the baskets at all. So let's add those in. That's piece F. So I'm going to lay those with wrong sides uppermost. Let's just move those to one side for now. I'm going to lay those wrong sides uppermost. I'm going to press in half. So do this at the ironing board if you're using cotton fabrics, and you can iron in a crease so you can see it. I'm using waterproof canvas, so hopefully you can see that anyway. So I've made a crease in the middle, grab a couple of clips, and I'm going to fold the sides in, the raw edges of the sides into the middle. On both sides. As I say, do it at the ironing board and you'll get a nice crease in there. Do that to both pieces. So this is wrong sides together we're folding. That's what I like about waterproof canvas. When you're doing a tutorial, I don't have to keep running to the ironing board because it kind of holds the crease in quite well. I will press it as we go because it does make things sit a lot nicer in the end. I would use a pressing cloth with waterproof canvas. You don't always need to if you have your iron on sort of a wool setting, but certainly on the back, because it often has a coating on, you don't want to melt that, so you're better off sticking with a pressing cloth if you can. And now I'm going to top stitch. I'll flip it over to the front and I'll top stitch along both edges, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. As usual, you can use a blind hemming foot to help you keep an equal distance from the edge. Just move your needle to one side so you get a nice even distance for top stitching. That always works. That's one. Trim them both up. And then I'm literally just going to fold those in half along the width. Along the width? Is it along the width or along the length? Fold it in half lengthwise. So you've got a nice little tab. You can put a D-ring in it if you want. You might want to add a wrist strap later on. So I'll just fold those both and baste them close to the edge just to keep them in place. Trim up, and then we're going to attach those to our outer. So there's our side tabs. I'm going to grab my outer piece A and your side tabs. Grab a ruler. So we're going to lay outer piece A face up, and I've got the short edges to the top and bottom. I'm going to add my side tabs 4 centimeters or 1 3/4 inches down from one short top edge. So whatever you want the front to be, in fact I like that one. Let's turn it around. So I've added as the front. I'm going to add those 4 centimeters or 1 3/4 inches down on both sides. So I've got the raw edges of the tabs and the raw edges of the fabrics lined up together. Raw edges of the outer fabric, that is. And I'll baste those in place too. Keep trimming. This waterproof canvas, I found this printed waterproof canvas recently, just on Amazon. But it does fray, it's not like other waterproof canvases, so I'm going to have to be careful with that. It might have been worth zigzagging around it before I started. So now we can add a badge. So to position my badge, I'm just going to find the centre point of my fabric, little crease. I'm going to add it 3 inches or 7.5 centimetres down from this top short edge where I added my side tabs. So you can use any badge. Use a handmade badge, little metal tabs or your own logo badge. I'll just use that. I've used a little bit of double-sided tape on there just to hold it in place, and I'll stitch around that. So there's my badge attached, quite badly actually. I should have used a matching thread, but for speed I haven't. Very naughty. Trim throughout your project so you don't find any loose ends that you can't reach at the end. So that's our outer complete. So that's super easy. And now we're going to move on to the lining. So let's lay that outer to one side. So we're going to construct the lining pocket first. So you do need to make sure you always add the inside pocket because we turn it through there at the end, so don't leave it out. So I'll take my upper lining piece B, I'm going to lay that right side uppermost. It's hard to tell with this, but that has got a backing on it, a coating on the back, so it's right side uppermost. And then I'm going to take my pocket lining, my first pocket lining piece D, and lay that right side down on top. So we want to centre that across the piece, so you can measure it, you can eyeball it, or you can just fold the piece in half just to see where it lies. There we go. So clip that in place. I'm going to stitch across there with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So it's right sides facing. And let's stitch across that. So just begin and end at the end of the pocket. I'm going to take this to the ironing board and I'm going to press that pocket piece open. So this is going to be our upper lining, and that is going to be the back of the pocket inside. So you can top stitch that if you want to. In fact, I'll top stitch it rather than taking it to the ironing board just to save time. But you want that nicely pressed open. There we go. We'll call that nicely pressed open. Save me a trip to the ironing board. So I can place that to one side, and then we can work on our lower lining and the second pocket piece. So let's take our lower lining piece C with right side uppermost. Now check the orientation of this piece. Make sure that you're viewing the width across the panel and the height top to bottom. So it's worth just putting a little T or something just to make sure you've got it in the right orientation. So on the medium and large sizes, the edges are shorter at the top and bottom, but on the small size, the width is fractionally longer than the height. So that's why I say check the orientation of that piece. But on the medium, it's the shorter edge, is the top and bottom. So I'm going to take my second pocket piece, piece D, and I'm going to lay that right side down centrally across one of the shorter or the top edge. So I'll just eyeball that. If you want to add a sewing label here, your own label, you can do that too. Do that before you attach this pocket. I won't bother adding one because I added one to the outer. But if you do want to add one, you can add one here before you add the pocket, but just make it a third of the way across. Don't put it centrally because we're going to add a snap fastener there. So just put it a third of the way across. So there we go, right sides together, centrally across the top edge, and I'll stitch that again with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. That's our second pocket piece attached. Now I am going to take that to the ironing board and press that open. We don't want to top stitch this at the moment, so I'll press that nicely in place and I shall be back in a moment. So that's my lower lining with the pocket pressed upwards and away. So you'll see your lower lining is flat and it's the seam allowance of the pocket that's folded over and upwards. I'm going to grab my upper lining and I'm going to place that next to it, so both pocket pieces are facing away from you, and we're going to flip the upper lining onto the lower lining. So I'm lining up the lining pieces and they're sitting right sides together. Line up my pocket pieces so everything is nicely squared up, and I'll clip that in place. Ooh. And once you've done that, once everything's nice and square, just nip back to the ironing board and press a 1 centimetre hem on the bottom of that pocket on both pieces, so they both line up nicely together. So clip those in place, make sure they line up. Okay, so that'll help us when we come to turn it through afterwards and turn up the pocket inside. That'll give us a nice neat finish. So now I'm going to stitch downwards from the pocket hem with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, stitching an L shape to join the side seams of the pocket and the top edges of the lining. So literally down the side of the pocket and across the top of the lining in an L shape. I'll do that on both sides. We're leaving this long edge open because we're going to turn the bag through there at the end. So if you can line it up with this seam that you made on the pocket to attach the pocket, that will also give you a nice finish. So that's one side stitch. You can see there I've come down the pocket and across the top of there. As I say, if you can, I haven't quite made it, but if you can just line it up against that pocket seam where you finish your stitching and turn, then that's great. It won't make much difference. You can see I've got a stitch over, but the closer you are to it, the better. I'll do the other side. Yeah, take that off. So that's my L shape both sides. And now if you just bring the pocket pieces towards you, facing you, with the lower lining on the top, we can just flip that over to reveal the right side, and that is your pocket completed. So you can see your pockets inside there. So again, I'll just take that to the ironing board and I'll press that nicely before we top stitch it. So I've pressed my pocket open and it's nice and flat there. You don't need to stitch this top edge, but if you do want to, we do it from the inside because obviously you can't get to it. So stitch from the inside, just open it up here, stitch along to the end. So you might not be able to get the last stitch in, but that's fine. So I'll do that now. You can increase your stitch length for top stitching. It's visually more appealing. Mine's on about 3. So trim that nicely, particularly anything that is sticking out from underneath, because they're hard to get at afterwards. There we go, top stitched that, and now I'm going to top stitch along the top here and make a box shape just to secure those sides of the pocket in place. So I'm going to stitch along at the same height as my original top stitching, so 3/8 of an inch from the edge approximately. Then I'm going to stitch down 2 or 3 stitches and then back along just to form a little box shape for extra security. That's one side, I'll do the other side. Yeah, and trim that up. And then I'm going to add a popper to the centre. You don't need to, it's optional. So I'm just going to use a plastic snap. You could use a slim magnetic clasp if you'd like to. If you prefer, if you haven't got a snap, but they're very simple to use. So I'm just finding the centre position, just by giving it a little fold. And I've added a small piece of Decovil I've used to the back, just to hold that nice and securely. haven't bothered with the front layer adding anything. So I'm going to stick my bodger through the whole thing, give me a position, and then one side of the clasp, it's not a clasp is it, it's a snap. So one side of the snap in, this is a cam snap. These are cam snap pliers. You can also use them with one of the big rivet presses, but they're so easy to apply, I just use these. I do have a how to attach plastic snaps tutorial on the YouTube channel too. If you'd like to scroll down, I will put a link in. So I'll put the bottom section in, or the back section. So it's the other side of the snap, just straight through. We made the hole in one, so this side. Am I in place? I think so. There we go. So there's our plastic snap applied. So we can clip that together. So I'm just going to flip that over and I'm going to trim the bottom of my pockets, which is quite important because we want to reduce any bulk when we turn it through. So I'm going to trim. I'm snipping the corner off, but I'm trimming right up because remember we're going to be turning that inside afterwards, so we need at least a centimetre trimmed at the bottom, or 3/8 of an inch trimmed at the bottom. So clip off the corner, but trim up at least a centimetre or 3/8 of an inch there, so that'll slim things down when we turn it through. Okay, so that is our lining complete, and we can put that to one side. So I'm going to be making, as you know, the zip pouch in this tutorial, so we are going to be adding a zip here. The basket versions without the zip, as I said, are made in exactly the same method. We just omit the zip basically, but you'll find full details at the end of the pattern. So let's have a look at our zip. So here's my zip. So that's 14 inch or longer for a medium sized pouch. And you'll find the zip lengths with alternative sizes in the pattern document. Just a little bit of inside information. We want our pouch to be able to open nice and wide. So if we've got a nice wide bottom like this, we don't want the zip impeding our ability to put our hands in. Because if you had tabs at both ends, it means your pouch would only open like that. So hence we need an open end of a zip on one side and a tail on the other. And that tail you can either leave hanging out or you can tuck it in afterwards. So you don't have to see it, but that is the reason we need the extra length of zip and the folded end on one side, just so it opens nicely and closes nicely. So as I say, 14 inch or longer zip for medium. I have put a couple of staples in the closed end, but you can zigzag stitch it. Anything to stop you pulling the zip puller off at an inopportune moment and having to unpick the lot. So give your zip tape a quick press before you start, because often they can shrink or they've got a bit of a wobble in them. So giving them a press really helps before you start. If you've not attached many zips before, I do have a attaching a straight zip tutorial, how to avoid lumps and bumps in your zip, on the YouTube channel, and I'll link that in below too. So our first job is to take our zip and we're going to make a mark 2.5 centimetres or an inch from the end. I don't really need a ruler, I've got a board. There we go. So make sure your zip is nice and straight. And I'm going to add an inch, a line at an inch at the open end. So you can just see that in chalk now. And at this mark, I'm going to fold the zip tape at 90 degrees, so the teeth angle outwards. So there's my chalk mark. I'm going to fold it along that chalk mark, just to get a placement, and I'm going to fold the teeth outwards. So hopefully you can see that. I'll put a pin in and show you closer up. So So hopefully you can see there. So my tape is now angled out at 90 degrees. So I'll do that on this side too. So there's my chalk line. I'm going to fold that up to meet the zip tape on the other side. So my zip angles out at 90 degrees. Let me put a clip in. There we go. So that's both sides. So just zip up and make sure they're in line with each other before you stitch it anywhere. You can easily adjust that. Yeah, we're looking about right. So now we just want to stitch a line of stitches, just basting stitches to hold that in place. So I'd stitch that along that outer edge of the zip tape. There we go, trimmity trim trim. Don't leave anything dangling. We don't like danglers. And there we go, that's stitched in place and it's basted right against the edge there where you won't be able to see it once the zip is stitched in. So I have got the zipper foot on my machine now. So let's attach it to our outer. So grab piece A. I'm going to work on the front first, so that's the side with the tabs and your badge if you added one. So I'm going to add a snip or a notch along the short edges on both sides. So that's the top and bottom edges. I'm going to snip 3 centimetres or 1 1/4 inches from the edge on each side. So just a little snip mark within the seam allowance. We don't want to see it afterwards. There's one and what that is a positioning mark for where our zip is going to lie, or the ends of our zip is going to lie. So if you have a look at that completed pouch, that snip mark will be lying there on that side, and it'll be where our zip pops out on the other side. Yeah. So just swivel it round and do the same on the other side, save you doing it later. So it's the short edge. I think they're all short edges on all sizes of the outer, but it's the top and bottom edge. Right, so I'll turn that around so I'm on the front again, and we want to place our zip right side down with puller to the left when closed. I'm trying to turn my head around here to make sure I've got it the right way around, because doing it upside down isn't always that easy. Okay, so I'm going to clip that in place. What I'm going to do first is line this angled edge of the zip up with the notch on that side. So the tape will lie in line with the top edge of the outer, but I'm going to finish right on that notch. So where that is, the zip is bending upwards, is going to finish on the notch. I'll open it a bit just so I can get it in place, and then I can show you closer. So just to show you that, so we're on the top edge of the front. So my zip bends upwards at that point, and that is the point that I want to line up with the notch I made. Okay, and the free edge of the zip tape is lining up with the raw edge, the raw top edge of the pouch. So I'm going to clip that all the way along, or most of the way along. I'll open it, it makes it easier on this first section. And now when I get to the second notch, I'm going to veer my zipper downwards. So I'm clipping it just as far as the second notch, or just before the second notch. And where I get to the second notch, there it is, I'm going to veer my zipper downwards at that point. So bearing in mind your seam allowance is going to be 6 mil or 1/4 inch, you want the zip free by 1/4 inch at that point. So I'm just veering it down. So you can do it quite sharply. Maybe you can see that. So I'm going to stitch along there with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you'll just run your seam off the edge, so your zip will carry on downwards and your seam will continue along, or your stitch line will continue along. So I'll give you a close-up when I've done it. Have your zip open fully to give you easier access. So there we are. I'll trim that and I'll give you a close-up. So that end, we've just got the right angle at the notch, and that end, the zip is veering down at the notch. So that's free. After that notch, the zip is actually free. It's not attached. So I've just veered it down to get it away from the stitch line. Take a look at the diagrams in the written instructions too. They'll help if you're not quite sure how to do that. It's fully documented in photographs in there too. And then I'm going to grab my completed lining panel. And I want to attach the side that doesn't have the pocket on it, because that's the back of the pouch and this is the front. So we want the side without the pocket. I'm going to lay that right side down. So you've got your top and bottom edges. So that's right side down on top. And I'm going to line up the top edge with the top edge of my outer. And I'm going to clip that in place. So we're going to stitch across there too. We want to make sure that veered side of the zip stays well down. We don't want it creeping back up again, so you can always put a little clip in the side there. One to remind you, but two to keep it out of the way. So make sure your sides are in line with each other. So still with our zipper foot on, we're going to stitch across the whole top edge with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to stitch on top of the original line, or flip it over and stitch on top of the original line, whichever you find easier. It's always good to give it a little push with a stiletto just to get it over that hump of where the right angle zip is. Make sure this side of the zip stays veered downwards. There we are. So if I open that up, you'll see that my zip is going into the seam at that end and out of the seam at that end. So I'm going to take that to the ironing board and I'm going to give that a press. I want to keep it open. I'm not folding it like a traditional pouch like this, because this top edge of the outer is going to form our facing. So we want to press it open, but we want the zip facing towards the outer and the seam allowances pressed towards the lining. So I'm going to give that a steam. So there we go, we're pressed. I'm going to trim off that nub of the zip at this point. So not the zip tail, we'll leave that. We need that, just the nub of the zip. And now I'm going to top stitch on the lining. So it's just to hold the seam allowance down on the back. So I'll leave my zipper foot on because it's easier to get close into there. There we are. So that's neatly top stitched. Just as an aside, as I say, you can refer to the pattern document But all we do with the baskets is leave out the zip. It's exactly the same, just without the zip, so you'd just be piecing the two fabrics together rather than with a zip sandwiched between the two. But again, we'll discuss that later. So that's one side of our zip. So zip that up. We do want it zipped up because we don't want any twists in the zip when we attach to the side. So twirl it round so you've got the outer towards you. Lift up your zip, pull it up and over to reach the other side of the outer. So the other top or bottom edge of the outer. You can see we've got right sides of outer together. Got the zip right side down on top. And that's the free edge, and we're lining up the free edge of the zip tape with the remaining raw edge of the outer. So we're going to do the same thing with lining things up here. So with the angled edge of the zip, you're lining it up against the notch you made on the outer. So we'll put one clip in there. Make sure your side panels are lining up. You can adjust slightly now if you need to. I'll put a couple of clips in there and then we'll open the zip because it's easier to attach then. So open it up fully and then continue clipping along there. And then we come to the second notch and we're doing exactly the same thing again. We're going to veer it down at the second notch. So at the point, the notches, we want the zipper to be about 6 mil or 1/4 of an inch below the top edge. That's the point it will pop out because your seam allowance is at 6 mil or 1/4 of an inch. So let's stitch over that with a seam allowance of 6 mil or 1/4 of an inch, or slightly less for this first side. Okay, so that's the second side of the outer, the zip attach, and now we just want to add the lining to it. So again, with the outer towards you, grab the remaining raw edge, the top edge or back edge of the lining and bring that over on top. So line everything up, sandwich the zip so you've got right sides of lining now to right sides of outer. Clip in place all the way along. And keep that veered zip veered down out of the way on the other side. Don't let it pop back into the seam. And then we're going to stitch across there at the full seam allowance of 6 mil or 1/4 of an inch. Give it a little tug at the end. There we are, that's our second side of the zip attached. So just turn it through. In fact, let me cut that nub of zip off before I forget. Not your long zip tail. Oh, it's flown off over there. Okay, so turn that through and have a look at it. There's my zip. You'll notice your lining is a lot shorter than the outer, and the reason for that is that we are forming facings with the outer, so your outer will drop inside to form facings at the end. So just zip it up and have a look, make sure everything's nicely in line. Yeah, so I'll take that to the ironing board and I'll give that a press again, and we'll do the same thing. We're going to press that open so we're not forming a crease at the top here, because you won't have a crease at the top, you'll have it further up. So press it open. You can put a tailor's ham or a towel inside if you need to, and we're pressing the zip teeth towards the outer and the seam allowance towards the lining. So there I am pressed again. So we want to top stitch along the lining again, 3 mil or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. A little bit more difficult this time because you've got the other side of the bag in the way. So keep the zip edge towards you and put this edge into the machine first. You can either sew it the right way around or the wrong way around. So I tend to find it's easier the wrong way around when you kind of sew up like a tunnel. So zip tail away from you and stitch along here, so you can just pull this back out of the way as you go. I've still got my zipper foot on the machine so I can get closer. So yeah, wind it out again and trim up. So that is my lining top stitch 2. Have a look at it, make sure you're happy with it. You can give it a press if you want to. You can see it's forming. It's shaped nicely now. You can see how those facings are going to drop in. Let's just click that. I'll zip it up. You can see that the lining is so much shorter, so your facings drop inside. I'm going to see how your zip tail is going to pull out before the end, so your seams won't come anywhere near it, and it allows that easy access to the pouch. Okay. So, I know it's not a huge project, but we always need a tea break in a Spencer Ogg pattern, so I say here is where you deserve that well-deserved Choccy biscuit. So before you start the next part of construction, and while you sip your brew, oh no, I've left mine over there, I'll have to get it in a minute. But have a little watch of the next section of video, and hopefully it will give you an understanding of how the base is folded to form the different size of bases. So before you start sewing again, choose your option. Decide if you want a flat pouch, or a slim standing base, or a wide standing base. I'm going to get the tea. So tea break over, back to work everybody. So there is our pouch as we have it so far. So I'm going to turn that inside out, and we're now going to make the bottom. So our first job is to just put a tack in the side seam. So we're not stitching the side seams, we're just going to tack them together at this point where the seams overlap. So just identify where your outer meets your lining. So it's not where your pocket meets your lining, and where your outer meets your lining on both sides. So I've got outer facing outer, lining facing lining, the whole thing is inside out, and I'm going to match those seams up. So I want to match them really nicely, and I'm going to put a tack in so they don't move. So let me just put a couple of clips in there, make sure those tabs are folded inwards. Same on the other side. On the other side you've got your zip tail, so make sure it's tucked right in. Your zip should be open at this point, don't close it up again. I will move it a bit away from the zip end though. I don't want it falling off. So outer to outer, lining to lining, zip tucked in, any side tabs tucked in, and match the seam together where your outer meets lining on both sides. And you want them to match up in a lovely straight line, because I'll show you on a finished pouch again. Hopefully I did a good job. It's this part here. So that's what you're going to be putting a tack in. So you really want those to match exactly on both sides. You don't want one down here and one up here. So that's what this is going to do. So match those exactly, and we're going to put 2 or 3 stitches in just at that point. You can actually stitch down an inch onto the outer, but don't stitch onto the lining itself, because you're going to need that. We're going to be folding it in underneath, so you don't want to catch too much of the lining. So just a couple of stitches onto the lining and an inch onto the outer, and that'll do it. And it's just to hold those points in place so you get a nice clean finish. Change my foot. I don't want a zipper foot anymore. So you can stitch this just as a basting stitch close to the edge, or you can actually do it at the full seam allowance of 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch and just stitch over it later. Make sure those zip tails are out of the way. Push them out of the way. If you need to use a hump jumper, you can do, just to support one side of the foot. So that's those positions just held in place to hopefully give me a nice clean match when I turn it through. So that'll stay there. So I'm going to finger press that at top and bottom, just so I've got a nice clean edge. So this is the point we need to decide on the size of our box bottom. So just to illustrate, this is actually the large size. We can have no box bottom at all and just make a flat pouch. To say large size, not medium this. So we don't have a standing base. We could put a narrow standing base in it. Or we can have a wide standing base. So decide at this point which you want to do. If you're just doing a flat pouch, just follow the instructions in the pattern, but basically you can just fold it over at this point and stitch down. You don't have to put any folds in it, but to add the box bottoms, whether they're narrow or wide, this is when we fold the outer and lining up. So place that to one side. So we're going to put a snip in the top and bottom edges. So flatten them out, and we want a centre notch in both top and bottom. So both sides, top and bottom. I'm going to cut a few of these off. I said this was a bit free. So I've added a centre notch. Yeah, so within the seam allowance, so I can see that it's really visible. So decide whether you want a narrow or a wide box bottom at this point. And that will determine how much these folds are folded up or in. So for a narrow box bottom, we're going to be folding up a narrow amount, or for a wide box bottom, we just fold up a larger amount. And then when you open it out, the pouch bottom will be twice that width we're folding. So we're now going to make a notch. So decide whether we want a narrow or a wide box bottom, or a slim or a wide box bottom. So on this one, I think I'll do a wide box bottom. So make sure that's pressed out flat. So I'm going to make a notch on both sides now, a distance up of my choosing. So I'm going for the wide base. I'm going to notch 2.5 inches or 6.5 centimetres up from the centre notch we just made. So you can choose, at the end I tell you how to size your own, and basically you can do this box bottom as big or as small as you want. Obviously you don't want it too much because you'll end up with it folded up here, but the 2.5 inches is about the maximum probably, but you can go anything in between. So 2.5 inches or 6.5 centimetres is there, and we'll do the same on the other side. 2.5 inches or 6.5 centimetres is there. So I've notched through both sides so I can see it, and I'm going to do it on the other side as well. So notch 6.5 centimetres or 2.5 inches there. So be as accurate as you can here. So that's my notches done. So those are important. So first of all, I'm going to fold my outer. And the outer just has one fold, and that's the easy bit. So I want to make sure that my pocket is on the back and is lying underneath. Again, that's important because we want to be able to pull the bag out through the pocket at the end. You don't want it enclosed in the centre of this. So flip so the pocket is on the back. So make sure you can see your centre notch and your folding notch. And this folding notch is the line we're going to fold on. We're not folding up to the notch, we're folding at the notch. So you can always draw a line across there just to remind yourself if you need to. So on the outer, take it to the ironing board, it's much easier. Make sure you creased across the bottom there, so you've got a nice line, and fold up on that notch, on your folding notch. Where is it? There. We'll just clip that in place for a moment. We'll have to take these clips out afterwards, but just so we can get it pressed in place. So we're folding on the notch there, on the notch, not up to the notch. There. So that fold measures the same distance as our notch was, so that will be our 2.5 inches. So just check it's even both sides. I am going to press that in place, but I'll do it with the other side at the ironing board in a moment. And then twirl it round, and we're going to do the lining. Now the lining is slightly different. We're not folding it up once, we're actually going to push in and up. So you'll end up with a V shape like that in the lining. So take your lining, take those centre notches, and at that point we're going to push it in and upwards, and we're going to get to the point where those folding notches are on both sides. I'm going to put a clip in there just so you can see it at the moment. So just there. So I've pushed the lining inwards. You can see the lining went up and in. So my centre notch is up there in the centre, and you see why you don't want to stitch down onto the lining with those side seams, because you're coming right up to it. And my folding notches are there. So I'll put a clip in those just so you can see it as well a little bit better. I'm going to take that and press it all in place. So on the lining, we've pushed it up in the centre, up and in. So the centre notch is now lying at the top here, and on the bottom points is our folding notch. We folded right on the folding notches. Okay. So that, if you put a ruler in there, that should also measure your 2.5 inches or 6.5 centimetres. Okay. So let's go and press that firmly into place, because we're going to have to take the clips out in a minute. So just for a double check before I take that to the ironing board, check that your pocket is on the underneath side. Flip it over. We've got 2.5 inches folded up away from the pocket. Pocket's underneath. So 2.5 inches on the outer, and on the lining side we've pushed up 2.5 inches. So I've literally just clipped those into place for the moment while I go and press a nice firm crease into there. These creases on the lining are going to stay there permanently when you finish, so do, you know, pressing them nice and firmly is really important. So there we are, nicely pressed. Make sure that pocket stays on the underside all the time. And just to reiterate, this is the wide base I'm making here. So I've used a measurement of 2.5 inches or 6.5 centimetres for my folds there and into the lining. If it was the narrow base, it would only be 1.5 inches or 4 centimetres. So it'd be exactly the same, we'd just be folding up less. So this is the wide base. And if you are making other sizes, by the way, the notching distance is different. So just check your size chart. It's all at the bottom in the size chart. So notching distances for the small and the large are different distances. So just check as you go. So if you're happy that all your notches are done, all your folds are done, we're now going to insert the outer into the lining. So it sounds extreme, but basically we're just going to be adding that into this slot here. So we've made a V slot in the lining, so keep that folded, and we've got a flap on the outer fabric of exactly the same size. So the first thing to do, pocket underneath, always pocket underneath, is fold it over, still in its folded position, so it matches exactly. So we've got outer and lining matching exactly at the bottom. I'm just going to put a clip above the folds just to hold it in place. for the time being. Push the zip out of the way if it's getting in the road. So I've clipped it so the outer and lining, still in their folded positions, are lying on top of each other directly. So I've just put a clip in the top above where the folds are, just to hold it there. And now I want to slip this fold of the outer into the slot of the lining. So you can do it any way. You can lift that up, slot it in, or from the other side, lift it up that way, slot it in like that. But basically this fold is going to be sitting inside this V of the outer. So just flip it in, should be exactly the same size, and I'm going to clip it in place along those side seams, and that's what holds everything together, lining and outer, and it makes the folds lovely and neat. Now before you stitch these side seams, we just want to look and make sure there's no rumples or creases in that anywhere, because you don't want to be stitching any creases in. So just double check that your folds are lying nice and flat, no rumples anywhere, top or bottom. We want to make sure that the two layers at the top are sitting exactly on top of each other. I'm just putting a ruler in so you can see. You can use a ruler to push them exactly to one another, make sure they're sitting nicely, and again make sure that that fold is sitting, the fold of the outer is sitting directly at the top of the fold of the lining. I'll show you what the outcome of that is on a bag. Just hold on so you understand what's happening. So ensuring that the top edges lie together mean that when you come to the top of the bag at the end, when you turn it through, it means they'll sit directly in line with each other. If they're not sitting directly on top of each other, you'll end up with one that's sitting a little bit further down than the other. And in terms of the folds sitting on top of each other inside, that's this bit at the bottom. So when your pouch is flat, you might find that one lays higher, slightly higher than the other, and that is if it's not lying directly on top of each other in that fold. So imperative, it sits directly on top of each other there, and in the fold, make sure it's pushed right up to lining and outer sitting right together in that fold. So I'm going to check this side too. Yeah, it seems fine. And now I'm ready to stitch my side seams. Bit of origami going on. So we're just going to stitch both side seams with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance. Double check you can see your pocket. You don't want your pocket tucked inside anywhere because we're going to be turning it through there. So make sure you can see your pocket on one side or the other. Other side. Okay, so there we go. Give it a quick trim. You can trim your seam allowances on the side seams, but I find it doesn't seem to make much difference actually. So I'm going to leave them. So I'm going to put my hand in the pocket, open the popper, and I'm going to turn it through. Exciting, exciting. So you'll turn up with the lining first. So there's my lining coming through, and then turn it through again to get to the outer. And then before you try popping it up into a standing pouch shape, just flatten it out and stretch out these bottom corners because they tend to crease up there and hide. And that one, you can see why we wanted to match those top and bottom edges. Now we've got a nice clean match. So hands in the bottom, there we go. And you can see how those facings drop nicely inside. Now you've created a facing without having to actually put an extra piece on. So you can now open it out and have a look. But I'm going to take that to the ironing board and give it a nice press before we do anything else. So there we are, our beautiful popping pouch, our first medium one with a wide base, and you can see that nice wide base gives it a big square bottom. If you'd done the narrow base, you'd just have a narrow base there, and your pouch would actually be wider when it stood up and taller. But I'll get to that at the end. So there we go, nice wide open mouth, and it stands nice and open, so you can get your hands in there. You can just leave it stood up with toiletries in or anything you want, stationary. So now we just have to deal with closing the bag and the zip end. So pop your hand inside the pocket and pull it out. And the edges are nicely matched together, hopefully, because you added that fold already. And we're just going to match those, get rid of any loose ends, we don't want to see those. And clip it, and then I'll stitch close to the edge, 3mm, 1/8 of an inch, just to close it off. If you make the bases wider, obviously the pocket appears to get longer. It doesn't get any longer, it's just it's reaching the base more. So if you do make the base wider, I think I've made this slightly wider than 2.5 inches actually, so your pocket starts to drop into that fold at the bottom. So you can always turn it up a little bit more. But there we go, so that's turned in, and I'll just stitch across there to close it. So that's the bag closed. Trim up. You don't want to see those. And I've got another one there. I took that back in. And what is worth doing is pushing those pockets in before you tuck it back in, just to make sure they're nice and flat in the corners. Take a little bit of time doing that. Push it in. Fasten it up again, and then we've just got to deal with the zip end. So let's flatten our pouch. Get a pair of scissors and a zip end. So in the instructions I show you how to use a fabric zip end or a metal zip end. So today I'll just use a metal zip end for speed, but it shows you how to fold and make the fabric zip end too. If you're going to tuck the tail inside, you might as well just use a fabric zip end, so because it's going to be hidden away anyway, so you might as well save the money. So with your pouch flat, we're going to measure 1.5 inches from where it emerges from the pouch. Make sure you're zipped up, by the way, we don't want to lose the puller off the end. So 1.5 inches. If I'm going to put a mark first, it'll be easier to do like that. 1.5 is there, just so I can get it nice and straight. Put it on my mat to cut it. So just chop off, so you're just left with 1.5 inches sticking out. There's nothing worse than a huge long zip tail sticking out of a bag when you've finished it. So nice and short and sweet. So you can stitch the end of that if you want to. In fact, I will. I do not want to lose my end at the last moment. And then I am going to tuck that into my metal zip end to give it a nice finish. So here's the zip end, it's just one screw. And a metal zip end, what shall I use those? So basically we're just folding the zip tape back behind each other. So just the zip is exposed at the top, and then I can tuck it into that zip end. I mean, it depends where you buy them from, they might be slightly different, but they're very much the same in application. They usually just got one screw. So I'm tucking that into there, right up to the end. Make sure it's straight before you fasten it on. And then get my trusty little screwdrivers. These are the best screwdrivers ever. They came in a Christmas cracker. I think they're for spectacles really, but they are the best thing I've ever had. So screw in. You can put a dab of glue on it as well if you like to, just for security. And then I'm screwing that on nice and tight until it sits right against the other side. So it does go through the zip. There we go. Right, it's nice and tight. And there we are. There's my zip end finished. Just open that up. So you can see how that gives a nice finish on the end of the zip now. So you can either leave that out of the bag because it looks nice now, it's got the zip end on it, or you can tuck it in. You just push it through. You've got a little gap there, so you can just push it through and into the bag, and it can sit inside so you don't see it at all. Push mine back out. And there we are. There is your pouch complete. Fold it up, fold it down. So that's your first perfectly popping pouch complete. Now it can do on the zip ends as well. Obviously that's a solid zip puller, but if you do have the more economical zip pullers, just a standard zip puller with a hole in the end, I've added a little piece of leather to these. Just cut a strip of leather 1/4 of an inch wide, I think it was, maybe 1/2 inch wide actually, looking at that. 1/2 inch wide, and I've pulled that through and put a ribbit through it just to give a little bit of excitement. They just look quite nice. And I put a ribbit through it, but you could stitch it as well. So just another way to finish off your zip. So that's our zip pouches sorted in flat, slim and wide base. If you're looking for the other sizes, just refer to the end of the pattern document and you'll find the small and the large there. And at the end of the document and at the end of this video, I'll just run through an idea of how to size your own too. Now, in terms of making the basket, so the construction of the basket is identical to the pouch. We simply leave out the zip and add handles if we want them. So for the medium-sized basket, cut out and follow the main pouch instructions, exactly the same, and you're going to follow them to section 3, prepare zip. So basically we're just leaving out the zip. So I'll show you how I do that. But again, you can just follow through the main video and leave out the zip in the middle. You don't need to sandwich anything in between. But I'll show you again here. So follow the main instructions and the main video until you get to section 3, preparing the zip, and stop and follow on from here if you're making the baskets. So if you want to add grab handles to your basket, just cut according to the size chart, and I folded those in half along the length, folded in the outer edges to meet the centre, and folded back in half again to enclose any raw edges. And now I'll just top stitch along both edges just to secure it in place, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Trim up. You can put extra lines of stitches on those if you want to make a feature of them, or even a decorative stitch along the centre. So that's my handles ready. The lining I've made up exactly as in the previous instructions, so just make your lining up as per the earlier video. I'll put that to one side for a sec, and now I'm going to position my handles on the outer. So take your outer piece, piece A, and lay it right side up. And then I'm going to measure across the top short edge and position my handles. So I'm going to measure 6.5 centimetres in, position it there. So the handle's falling down onto the main body of the bag, or pouch, or whatever it's going to be now. It's back to being a bag again, really, isn't it? And then the other side of the handle, just make sure it's not twisted, and add it to the other side at the same distance, 6.5 centimetres or 2.5 inches. There we go. And I'll just baste those in place. Make sure they're straight as you stitch them on. You can add an extra line of stitching on there as well. It just kind of holds them in place a little bit better if you stitch just inside the seam allowance, just fractionally. Yes, that's one handle attached. So if you're making the baskets, it's exactly the same for baskets with or without handles. You just leave off the handles if you're not adding them. So there's one handle. I'm going to grab my lining now. And if this is my front, if I've got a badge on there, I want the side without the pocket on the lining. So I'm just going to place that on top and line up the top edges. Clip in place. And it's so much simpler on the baskets because we're not adding a zip. It's so much quicker. So just to check, you've got the right sides facing each other, right side of lining, right side of outer. If this is the front, if you've added a badge, you want the lining side that doesn't have the pocket on it at the top. And we're ready to stitch that. We'll stitch across there with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And don't worry that your lining is so much shorter than your outer. That is correct because we'll have facings on our baskets too. So let's stitch that. Trim up. So we now want to top stitch that. So open out, take the ironing board and press it flat. We want to press it open, but we want the seam allowance towards the lining and the handle up towards the outer. So I'm just going to top stitch across there, 3mm, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Do press it first, it's just because I'm on waterproof canvas I can get away with it. There we are, we're top stitched. That'll give a nice finish inside the basket. So now we're ready to do the other side. So grab the free edge of the outer, and if you're adding handles, let's add them first. You don't need to. So same measurements as before, 2.5 inches I think it was, 6.5 centimetres. Both sides, make sure it's not twisted anywhere. I'm good at realising that right after a bag's finished. Double check, yes. Okay, stitch those within the seam allowance. I've given that a double line of stitching again. Trim up. So that's our handles attached if we're putting them on. Just ignore that bit completely if you're not adding them. And now take the free edge of the lining, pull it up to reach the free edge of the outer, and we're going to stitch that in place as well. So clip in place, make sure your handles are straight under there. And I'll stitch across there again with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we want to top stitch that again, a bit more difficult because it's now inside and you've got the rest of the bag trying to stop you, but the easiest thing is just use the bag as a tunnel. So you can do it with the bag inside or outside, but press with the handle towards the outer and the seam allowance towards the lining. So give it a good press. Again, I'm using waterproof canvas so I can get away with not doing it here. And then I'm going to top stitch 3mm or 1/8 of an inch onto the lining side to hold back that seam allowance. But you do need to do it open. Don't try and fold outer onto lining like a traditional pouch. Got my handle stuck. There we go. Okay, so just flip it through so you can have a look at your handle sitting prettily. Hopefully. There we go. So don't worry that your lining is a lot shorter than your outer. That's correct, because our facings are going to fold in like this. You can choose to top stitch at the end, and that will hold your handles closer to the top as well, but perfectly optional. They look nice both ways, but don't do it at this point because we need these sides open. So we're ready to do the side seams. So you'll find all the timestamps in the text below the video, so just skip on back now to the tea break because you don't want to miss that, and join in with side seams. And now just a final note on alternative sizes. Now you've made the medium sized pouch or basket, why not try a small or a large version too? You'll find a cutting chart at the end of the written document for all the sizes, so that's all 3 sizes together. Also note there are different folding notch measurements for each size of pouch or basket too, which are also shown on the chart to the side of each relevant size. As I mentioned earlier, for the larger sizes, you can increase the firmness of the interfacings. So for example, on some of my large sized baskets, I wanted them to stand alone, support themselves. So I actually used Decovil Light rather than medium weight fusible interfacing. But don't use bulky interfacings or stabilizers. You do not want to add foam or fleece because they're going to add bulk, and it means the bottom folds will become too bulky. I also wanted to share with you the tools to create your own sizes. So do have a look at the written document for that because there are things to digest. But once you've made a couple, you'll understand how it all works. You can go mad with your own sizes and start adding your own features or even making your own items from the dimensions. So just as an example, here's a bag I made simply by extending the height of the slim base large pouch and adding the feature handles to the outside before making it up. You can also make small versions, though they do get a little fiddly as they get smaller, so I would suggest an outer no shorter than 12 inches in total. So here are a few tips for creating your own sizes. Again, I must mention, look at the written document because it's all there laid out properly. I'm going to talk through this very quickly. But the easiest way to do it is to start with one of the existing pattern measurements and amend as follows. To increase the width of the pouch, add the required increase to the width of all pattern pieces. So for example, add 1 inch to the width to increase by 1 inch in the finished pouch. So that's all pattern pieces. To increase the height of the pouch, you're going to need to add twice the required increase to the height of pattern pieces A and C. So an example, add 2 inches to the height of pieces A and C to increase the height of the finished pouch by 1 inch. To calculate the base width or amend the base width, the distance of the folding notch from the centre notch should be half the required total base width. So as an example, if your required base width is 3 inches, your folding notch should be at 1.5 inches from the centre notch. So as I say, have a look at it in the written document. It'll make more sense with it all laid out in front of you. There are a few things to consider when you're amending the sizes as well, and again I've put those considerations in the written document. Just things like when you make your base wider, it will shorten the height of the finished pouch. So do have a look at that. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed making your pouches and baskets along with me today. Do share your photos on social media, either on my Facebook sewing group or on Instagram using the hashtag Spencer Ogg. I really hope you're going to make lots of these going forward. There's such a fun project and there's so many options to try. So what are you waiting for? Go sew!